All right, so the title of this video is a little bit misleading. It's gonna say the Niak versus the Nallo 2 GT slash Anjan 2 GT. And that implies that there could be a winner, and that's the part that's misleading. I use that term more just because we're gonna do a comparison video. And I just happen to be lucky enough to have these two tents set up beside each other. So Spencer, who is holding the camera, and myself are on day 10 of a sheep hunt, and we've got 3 days left to go. So if we look a little rough around the edges, that's why. Now, I brought my Niak, and Tristan, who's actually gone home now, brought the Nallo 2 GT. Now, right out of the gate, the Niak is a 3-season and the Nallo is a 4-season. So that kind of makes them apples to oranges. However, when I bought my Niak, I was having a really hard time deciding between the Niak and the Anjan. And the dimensions and basically everything except for some of the fabrics and the fact that there's dual doors, the Anjan and the Nallo are essentially identical. So this is going to allow us to do a comparison video for the usable space and that kind of stuff. So right out of the gate, let's talk about how much room you have in each tent. They're identical. 2.6 cubic meters inside of each tent. Now, when I get in and climb around, I'm gonna make some notes that I think the usability of that space is different in each tent. Now, one of the primary differences is the vestibule area. In the Niak, you have 0.75 cubic meters, and you'll see when I get in, it's not a lot. Like, you can't even really fit your backpack in there. You could fit a small backpack. I can fit like some odds and ends or my boots, but I still need to bring a pack cover if I'm gonna leave my pack out overnight. Now, the Nallo 2 has a 2.2 cubic meter vestibule. It's gigantic, and what is interesting is that in the Anjan, it actually has 0.3 cubic meters more. So the Anjan has 2.5, the Nallo has 2.2, and the Niak has 0.75. Now let's talk a little bit about weight. Packed up, ready to go at the trailhead, this is 3 pounds, 12 ounces. The Nallo that we're gonna see over there is 6 pounds, 6 ounces, which is why you can't even compare these tents because they're completely different. However, the Anjan is 4 pounds, 10 ounces, which brings it in, it's only a 14-ounce discrepancy, and you're getting a gigantic vestibule, which is why I say there are different ways of solving potentially the same but also different problems, which is why, you know, the punchline to this whole comparison is that in a perfect world, you would have a Niak and an Anjan GT. However, without the GT, I don't think the Anjan is as much of a competitor to the Niak. And I'm gonna get into that right now. The reason I chose the Niak over the Anjan is that it's freestanding. I'm a huge fan of freestanding tents for several reasons. First and foremost, safety. I don't depend on any guy lines for my tent to stay up. So if I'm in severe conditions and all those guy lines rip out of the ground, this tent does not collapse. I own a Solo, it's the same way. I almost bought an Acto, but I didn't like that. And you will see when we get over to the Nallo, if all those guy lines rip out, that tent will collapse. You're gonna have to hop out in the middle of the night and do something about that. Number 2 reason I prefer the Niak. When it's freestanding, you can move it around. And you can, you know, Spence was commenting earlier that I'm always fiddling with it for 5 or 10 minutes before I get to my final setup, because I like to set it up, I like to get in and lay down before I put any pegs. So if I'm slightly off kilter or there's any kind of incline, I can just move the tent around 5-6 inches one way or another and get it just perfect, then peg it down, then run the guy lines. The other thing, and you'll see when I hop in both of these, I find the head space a little bit more usable. I'm 6'1", 240 pounds, so I'm a big dude, and I find the head space a little bit more usable in the Niak than the Nallo or the Anjan. Finally, one point that must be made, these are both considered, all 3 tents are considered 2-person tents. You'd have to be really small 2 people to use the Niak for 2. you'll see when I open this up, my sleeping pad, which is 25 inches by 72 inches, takes up like 3/4 of the thing. There's no way you would put 2 grown human beings in there at the same time. You could, and Tristan and Spencer did, put 2 people in the Nallo. So if you're a couple or you plan on doing a bunch of camping with your girlfriend or something, I think right there, conversation's over. The Nallo wins out, because there's no way the 2 of you would fit in here, and you'd have to go up to something in the 3-person line, so you had like room for 2 people and a bit more. And I do find it rather interesting. And they're pretty straightforward about this on the website, but Hilleberg kind of under promises on everything. Like, they use tougher materials than they need to. The 3-season tents are really what most people would consider 4-season tents. So it is kind of interesting that they call the Niak a 2-person tent, when I think it's a bit of a stretch. I don't think this is a practical 2-person tent for most people, but they are pretty straightforward about that on their website, that it would be very cozy and you'd have to be a couple. You wouldn't want to go with your buddy. And that really what this was designed for was more of a palace for the 1-person adventurer. Okay, so let's jump in and I'll lay out some of the components that I like. All right, it's pretty hot right now, so I'm gonna try and do this relatively quickly so I don't have to sit in here for very long. So Spencer, if you could come in and show this area in here. So this is technically 0.75 cubic meters. You can see you wouldn't fit a big backpack. Now, one thing I would like to highlight, and Hilleberg does a good job of notifying you of this, you can unclip those 2 corner cables, and then this corner of the tent folds in and you can have a larger vestibule, which I did do one night, and that was good. So if you were in a pinch, you could slide your backpack in there and just lose a little bit of floor space. So now here's the thing, and try and get this headroom. Like, I have a good 3 to 4 inches over my head, and I'm a big dude, and I can move over here, I can move over here, I can sit cross-legged, I can cook my stuff in the morning. Like, my shoulders and elbows aren't bumping on anything. Like, for one dude, this is a very usable tent. And now I'm just gonna readjust. So here's me laying down. So my toes do touch a little bit, but remember, it's a double-walled tent, so unless you have some condensation, that's not gonna get that wet. And I've got lots of headroom. And again, I'm 6'1", 240, so if I fit in here like this, most other people aren't gonna have a problem. But in all fairness, you can see that realistically, you're not going camping with a buddy. You could take your girlfriend or wife, but that would be, or your life partner, however, you choose to live. And there would be room. It would be cozy though. I'm trying to think. I think that's about it. The final note on the differences between the two, I would say, are setup time. That's another thing I really like about freestanding tents. We moved camp every night for the first 5 nights in a row. So we got to set these tents up side by side every night. Tristan and Spencer had 2 people on their tent, and I'd say on average, I set mine up in half the time. 2 poles in, they're identical poles. This is another thing that people don't realize about Hilleberg. When they say something is part of a line, it not only has to do with the seasonality of tent, but also the ease of setting up the tent. For instance, in this particular line of tent, all the poles are identical. So you never have to worry, are you putting the right pole in the right pocket, which makes it very quick to set up. When you start getting into the Nallo, that changes. You have different lengths poles, some of them are taped different colors. It's not a big deal, but it's just something to keep in mind. It does make it a slightly more complicated setup. So let's walk over here and take a look at the Nallo / Anjan. So right out of the gate, the other thing we should point out, gigantic footprint compared to the Niak. And I will say, from a practical application, we definitely had a couple camping spots where I could have set up the Niak, but there was no room to set this guy up. So we had to walk around for another 20 or 30 minutes and look for bigger spots. So that's something to keep in mind. If you're gonna be in steeper terrain, the Niak, and I would say even the Nallo or the Anjan without the GT. And for those of you who don't know, the GT is this part. So you can buy a Nallo 2, it's this part of the tent and it just comes straight down in a small vestibule like mine had, same as the Anjan. When Hilleberg adds the GT, what they're really adding is this big vestibule, which I think is part of the value proposition of this tent. The Anjan Nallo line are not nearly as attractive to me without the GT, because at that point they get so close to the Niak, and the Niak is slightly lighter and freestanding that it's really a no-brainer for me. When you add the GT, that's when things get interesting. We've had inclement weather a couple times and we've had dinner in here and it was awesome. I sat in the vestibule, Spencer sat in the tent, we unrolled the door, zipped the vestibule down, we were cooking, hanging out, listening to the iPad, and we would have had to set up an additional tarp. It really adds a layer of functionality to your camp that you're not gonna get with the Niak alone. You'd have to add an additional tarp. Okay, now I'm gonna open it up and get in and kind of show you the practical headroom. So this would be a tunnel style tent. And the one thing that is interesting is you can see you do have more room for 2 full grown adults, but you will see, even if I sit right in the middle, my head's touching. I move this, I'm touching everywhere I go. Whereas in the Niak, I wasn't. So I would say almost there's more usable sleeping space in the Nallo / Anjan, but there's more usable practical space in the Niak. And if you wanted to sleep opposing directions, having somebody's head down there, I would personally feel a little bit claustrophobic. And if you're camping with 2 dudes, sometimes it's a little uncomfortable having both your heads up at the top. It also gets narrower down there. So you're not gonna have as much room to roll around. I think that's about it as far as, and again, this is not so much as my attempt to say that one tent is better than another tent. It's more, especially being Canadian, we never actually get to get in these things without spending a lot of money to have one shipped up to Canada. And what I'm trying to do with these videos is show people what the tents look and feel like in real world practical applications before you actually sink the money in it. So here's a final kind of wrap up. Let me get out of here because it's hot as blazes. So I would say if you're one person and you're gonna be moving around a significant amount, the Niak is the clear winner. If you were going in solo and you were gonna set up in one location and it wasn't a 12, 14 day hunt and you could afford an extra 3/4 of a pound to a pound, I think the Anjan 2 GT is a very compelling tent. And if you were, this is a 4-season tent, so you would really need intense snow or really tough circumstances. The other benefit about this tent though is if you do want to share it with 2 people, you can split the pack weight. So it's 6 pounds, 6 ounces. That's 3 pounds, 3 ounces each. That actually is kind of like putting a Niak each. However, let's look at that for a second. Tristan and Spencer brought this tent together. So they were carrying, let's just assume 3 pounds, 3 ounces each. They might have traded a stove or something in order to accomplish that. My tent weighs 3 pounds, 12 ounces. So I was only carrying 1/2 a pound more. I had all that room. I had my own tent, a little bit of privacy, smaller footprint. Only thing I'm lacking is the vestibule. So I'd say this is really a couple's tent. If you're a solo dude, it's really between the Anjan and the Niak, and then it's gonna be depending on circumstances. If you're moving a lot, weight is a premium, you go the Niak. If you're setting up for more than 3 or 4 days at a time, and it's not a super long hunt and you can carry a bit more weight, I'd go with the Anjan 2 GT. Okay, quick little add-on. I actually meant to ask, Spencer's the one who's been sleeping in this thing all week, and I actually meant to ask him his opinion before the end of the video. And we shut the camera off and started talking, and he had all these good points. So break it down. As a guy who's slept in this for a week and been sleeping beside me in the other tent, what's your kind of sentiments, and which one would you go with?
So I think if it was just me in the tent by myself, I think personally, being a smaller guy, I really like having the vestibule.
And how tall are you and what do you weigh?
I'm 5'8", about 160 pounds, so I'm not a very big guy. So getting in this tent I have tons of room.
Could you hop in for us just so people can get an idea?
So for me, I can sit in here comfortably. You know, Jay and I were having dinner in here one night when it was raining. I have plenty of room in here. I can move around. Obviously, Jay probably can't say the same. You know, he saw his head was hitting up top and stuff. The other thing too is with the vestibule, it doesn't really need to be flat. So if you're kind of pressed for room for flat spots in a tent, the vestibule here doesn't need to be on flat ground. So the footprint is about the same, I believe, as your tent, Jay. So we can possibly make that work, but all in all, I personally, just with the weather we get in BC, I would take the vestibule. It's really nice just being able to throw your gear. If you forget something in the middle of the night, it's just one quick zip and you're grabbing it out of your bag or whatever, and you're not having to hop out of your whole tent. So yeah, no, I would definitely take the vestibule personally, being a smaller guy, and I think the extra pound is worth it for a guy like me.
Awesome. And one more point we made is that you could accomplish the same thing with a secondary tarp with the Niak. This is something I'm considering for my second goat hunt this winter with my solo. And that's gonna add somewhere in the neighborhood of a half a pound if you were to use a Dyneema or Cuban fiber tarp. And at that point, the Niak and the Anjan 2 GT are very close in weight savings. And the Anjan is kind of the all-inclusive package, and you wouldn't have to worry about a secondary tarp and stuff. So it's a very hard decision to make, but I think either way, both stellar tents, and you can't lose. All right, that's it. Any questions, leave them in the comments below and I'll do my best to get to them. Thanks very much.